Hi, I'm Scott Roxborough. I'm the European Bureau Chief for the Hollywood Reporter, also proud Canadian, and it's my great pleasure to do this talk today on Canadian film with two young Canadian directors who have their first films here at the Munich Film Festival. So if I can introduce, and you both can come on stage, please. There you go.
Hello.
Hello. So, with Hosea Mirza and Ben Petrie, the films are The Queen of My Dreams and The Heirloom. If you haven't seen them, I'll do a very quick super summary of them. I think it's very interesting with these two films because independent film often is thought of as just one thing or another. These two films show the sort of breadth of independent film, though I think they both have quite a lot to do with one another, actually, thematically, which is interesting. Queen of My Dreams, again, if I can summarize it really, really quickly, it's a sort of two parallel coming-of-age stories about a mother and a daughter. Mother in 1960s Pakistan, daughter in late 80s, 90s Nova Scotia, and their relationship to one another. And you go through sort of, I guess, three separate eras because it takes place in the modern day, takes place in the early 90s, and in 1960s Pakistan. Also in the style of, especially stuff in the 1960s Pakistan, in the style of Bollywood cinema, and that's sort of a thematic connection is Bollywood cinema through the whole thing, which is kind of fascinating. Very ambitious and big for a first film, a first independent film, you know, period drama, couple of periods, a lot of costumes, a lot of very extravagant set pieces and so forth. Ben Petrie's The Heirloom is more of a micro-budget film, I would say very personal film, but you can tell them on this, is starring yourself and your partner, who you co-wrote it with, if I'm right, about the two of you getting a rescue dog during COVID and the story of that, what that does to your relationship and what emotions it brings up. In some ways, very simple, almost theatrical drama, very closed set and so forth, but I thought quite emotional and quite interesting also on a meta level because the film is also about you making the film that we are watching. Can I ask both of you, just to start, this is, for both of you, you've both done shorts before, you've done web series as well. For both of you, this is your first feature film. What was it about this story, or how did it come that this story was the one that you wanted or ended up doing as your first feature? What was it about the story, or what was it about the situation that brought that about?
I think for me, The Queen of My Dreams, the feature, really has roots in my first short film. So my first short film was also called The Queen of My Dreams. It was a 3-minute film. I made it in 2012. And really the reason I became a filmmaker was this movie. And I made it before I knew I was a filmmaker. I was really trying to reconcile my identities. I was trying to reconcile whether I could be queer and Muslim and love Bollywood romance all at the same time. And I wasn't even making a movie. I was trying to make an art piece, an art installation that my friend said, I think you could make this a movie. And so it was through that conversation and that relationship that we turned it into a film together. And by sharing that film, it really kind of saved my life. And by sharing the film and all the queer film festivals that I got to attend with the film, I saw the impact it could have on others, but also it gave me a community that I didn't have before in a very clear, essential, life-affirming way. And I would say film festivals gave me a place where my voice mattered. And so when I really sort of thought about my journey and the movies that mattered. I mean, I thought that could be something I'd expand on, but at the time I was an actor. I wasn't directing, so I did a one-person show, and that was my big dream, and I performed that. I wrote it and developed it in Chicago, in the US, and then it was only after that time that I started to think maybe this could be a movie. And I met my producer, Andrea Wilson Mirza, who's also my wife. Marry your producer. And
always a good tip, actually. Yeah, just marry your producer.
Just marry your producer.
Everything is much easier.
If they're great. But it was after meeting her that she was like, yeah, I really see how your play could be a film, and I want to help you make that. And so it was with this film that I decided I would transition from being an actor, writer to a writer-director. And it made sense because as I was sharing the feature script with people were like, well, who's directing it? And I said, I don't know. I'm going to find a queer, Muslim, brown woman director.
From Sydney, Nova Scotia.
Right. And they're just like, okay. And people were like, what about you? And I said, no, I don't direct. Directing is so hard. Directing is for people who know so much about cameras. And it was actually at the Toronto International Film Festival. They do a writer's studio, and my screenplay got into that writer's studio in March 2020. And there, when all the other participants kept telling me, you are talking about your movie like a director. And so I said, okay, I'm going to direct it. Fine, I'm just going to do it. Because I couldn't figure out who else could direct it. So I said yes, and as soon as I said yes, the world opened up, and suddenly everything made sense. And quite frankly, I think this was the journey I was meant to be on. So, it's a circuitous path to being here, but I think for me, directing this film is also not just about directing this film, it's also about finding the thing I'm meant to do for the rest of my life.
I mean, are there parallels there with your story, Ben? Because I can't imagine anyone else telling this story except you, and it seems like it also is a circuitous path.
The big difference is that I went with the marry your co-star route as opposed to the marry
It's similar. It's similar, a little different.
Yes, there's synergy. I had made a few short films before. I made a short film with my girlfriend at the time, Grace, who we had just been together for a couple of months. And I wrote a script about a couple, and it seemed like a fairly low-stakes thing, and I decided that I would try to act in it with her. I hadn't been an actor before. She is an actor. And it was the most successful short film that I had made before. She won a prize at Sundance for it, and we just had a lot of good luck with it. And I decided that I would try to expand that short film into not a direct feature-length adaptation, but to take the dynamic and the relationship that we had developed as actors and expand that into a larger chamber piece feature film. And I worked on that screenplay really hard for a few years, putting an enormous amount of pressure on it, trying to recapture what had made the short film successful for us, and eventually over the course of those few years put so much pressure on it that I killed it. I suffocated it of all of the original inspiration that had been there, and 3 years later found myself just boring into the page, finessing details that really didn't matter, trying to make it into this perfect object. Finally was entering pre-production for it, and we had received Telefilm Talent to Watch funding, which is a micro-budget, non-recoupable grant. And we were just a couple months from shooting, and COVID dropped. So that put the film on pause, and I felt like I was really going to lose my mind, because I had been really just putting so much of myself into this project. I mean, we were all losing our minds at that time. And then we adopted a traumatized rescue dog in the middle of the pandemic. And within a couple of days of that dog coming into our life, I felt this insane surge of feeling and love for this animal and for my girlfriend, seeing her in this kind of renewed light, in this familial way. And I couldn't help but notice that the feelings that were coming up in me were so much more powerful and so much more genuine than the feelings that I was having micromanaging this document on my desk. And within a week or two, I had decided I was going to completely abandon my screenplay of 3 years, tore it up, threw it away, and we kept our production dates a couple of months from then and made this improvised movie reenacting our experience adopting the dog. And also by adopting the dog, I suddenly, it revealed a lot to me about myself. Adopting the dog, I felt a renewed perspective on my own stagnation, on my own fear. I saw a lot of my own fear in my dog's fear, and it just kind of shone a light on this life I was living that I had really just put into this stagnant, stuck place. And I felt like if I don't follow this inspiration right now while it's alive and it's hot, I'm not sure if I'm ever going to make another film again. So we just jumped off into the cliff and made this improvised movie, The Heirloom, instead.
Can I ask, just on a technical point, you had the micro funding beforehand for your other film. Was Telefilm just cool with you saying like, okay, I'm throwing that out, and I've got this other thing. It's about a dog, and we don't have a script, but we'll do it we'll just make it up as we go along. They were cool with that. That worked.
Because of COVID, they granted a lot of filmmakers an unusual amount of leniency to adapt their ideas to the new restrictions of production that needed to be on films as a result of the lockdown. And the other script that I had been developing had expanded into a bit of a larger piece, and this new idea was a chamber piece, just one location in our apartment that we could shoot just the two of us. So it was actually more doable in a COVID context, and I think for that reason they were happy to grant the change.
For both of you, I mean, it seems to me, I think both your films are fascinating for our levels, technically interesting, but emotionally I find them really fascinating because they seem to be so close to who you are and your own identities. Is that challenging as a director to take a story that's so personal, you know, your relationship with your mother, your relationship with your partner and your dog, and you know, have the distance to shoot it, plan it, edit it, and present it to a wide audience? I mean, is there at any point where you felt, oh God, what am I doing? I'm falsifying who I am, or I'm tearing apart, you know, my own history and presenting it in a way. I mean, I just find that so brave, but also there must have been points where you were terrified of what you were doing to yourself or to your own history on screen.
I mean, for me, I think that film, you know, even before I made my own short film, I had started making like little web series and things like that, and I was acting, and so the external processing of private struggle was how I survived as a human being. So that kind of external manifestation of self and of me was something that was like, oh, this is how people now know who I am. Oh, I posted about my girlfriend on Facebook or you know, it's like, oh, that's how people know my identity. And so film for me was always started as a way of coming out. Both coming out to myself, coming out to family, coming out to community, and as a way of becoming more comfortable with who I am. And I've definitely always written like from a very personal place, and I think I've almost grown into embracing who the person I am now, you know, which is someone who's very comfortable being very public, and unapologetically who I am. But I would say that, you know, it came through if you really look at every short I've made, I'm always processing the question of like, how do we become who we are? And I write a lot of comedy, and I love comedy, and comedy is also for me a tool of survival, and a tool for healing and having really tough, complicated conversations. And so I've always kind of processed in these ways. And I would say with this film, The Queen of My Dreams, the feature, you know, when I was writing, for me, the struggle was, how do you adapt a play into a feature film? And I was trying to stick very close to the play. The play was 99% my life. And I found actually that I unlocked the movie and the screenplay when I let go of the play. And let go of the kind of, you know, there are fibers of reality and my own experience. The whole movie is my POV, right? But the whole movie is not an autobiography. The movie is also collective history, collective memory. It's speaking to elders about what their experiences were living in Pakistan in the 60s. It's looking at images from the 60s and vintage Pakistan. It's looking at images of the 80s. It's seeing old ads of Dick Van Dyke flying on a plane to Pakistan, drinking champagne, and being inspired by that, and placing all of those things into the film, and also just thinking, what might it be like for characters like someone like my mother, like someone like my father? What might it have been like if I knew what I knew now when I was 13? What would that be like for that character in those circumstances? So I definitely, you know, turned the truth into a work of fiction in many ways. But I do believe that anything I am hired to work on, whether it's another movie that I write, or, you know, if Ben is like, Foz, I want you to direct this screenplay I wrote, I'm always going to bring my perspective. So you'll always have a personal story from me, which I feel like that's my sort of like vision and mission as a director.
Yeah, there was something about, if I could go back, I think I would probably fictionalize it a touch more for my own sake and also for Grace's sake, because it was definitely very revealing. But yeah, when we adopted our dog, I was listening to this audiobook about dog training philosophy, and it was really proselytizing this idea that particularly in the early days of having a dog, your every move is going to affect their relationship to you, especially if you have a rescue dog who's coming from a vulnerable past. And so I felt really self-aware, intensely self-aware, that my actions were going to imprint upon her. And so her presence in our apartment was like a surveillance camera on me that could just X-ray right into my own mind. Because I felt not only I couldn't fake it and fake being calm because she can smell the pheromones. I have to really be calm, and that made me really aware of the dynamics going on in my own psychology, hyper aware of that, and it was really revealing to myself. I noticed a lot of dysfunction in my own mind that I hadn't been aware of, a lot of dysfunction in the way that I was relating to my girlfriend, those insights became everything that I was driving towards. I was always heat-seeking towards the vulnerabilities and the kind of the unflattering truths that I was noticing about the things that were going on inside of my own head. And there was a moment on the film, on like the second or third day, when the first assistant director came up to me, and she kind of slapped me on the knee and said, as though this was something I was already aware of, "Wow, you're gonna come off like a real asshole in this movie, eh?" And that was kind of news to me in some way, because everything that I felt was worth doing in the movie was the stuff that I was revealing about the dysfunction going on inside of myself. And that was all well and good until the editing process, when I had to confront 150 hours of me being cringe as hell. And having to face myself in the worst possible light for the year and a half that we were editing was extremely unpleasant. And I think I would revise the approach a touch and put a patina of fiction over it.
I think it's great. As you can probably tell, the film is hilarious. This is also really, really funny. But it both, in some ways, I say, that's why I find, of course, I saw them back to back, so I draw parallels. But there are these sort of, you both seem to wander this line between comedy and drama. And both, as I say, have a meta ebene. I mean, your film uses Bollywood not just as a metaphor. Both characters are watching a specific Bollywood film, and then they project themselves into the film at various periods. You stage an incredible Bollywood sequence on the Atlantic coast, which almost brought me to tears. I thought that was phenomenal. But I wonder with Ben, with your film, I think it's really interesting because, as I say, during the making of this movie, and it's very, very personal. You tell your partner, oh, we should make a movie about this, and then you stage scenes that we've already seen as they're supposed to be done in the movie, and repeat things. And then there's this, I think the most powerful section of the film is this conversation that you have with your partner, who she sort of tears into you for, saying, I don't think you'll be a good father, I don't think our relationship is working, and so forth. Incredibly emotionally retching. And then a boom guy walks through the scene. You realize, oh right, we're just filming this. I asked both of you how you use this sort of, because I think in both cases it makes your films cinematic in a way. It's not just therapy, it's not just exposing life or autobiographical, it's cinematic. But after both you using that meta level, what do you think it brings for you? Because with you, for example, with that scene, I don't know, it brought up a lot of different emotions in me. I thought, it's like, is it partially hiding because you're saying, like, this is too raw for me to show, or what does it bring for you? Because you seem to use it quite deliberately a lot of times through the film. And same question to you, Faiza, but because it seems that you're using it slightly differently. What do you use that sort of meta storytelling? What does it bring for you in this film, and why'd you use it?
In my case, it came about because, as I said, we hadn't had our dog for very long when we started making the movie. And at a certain point, the movie caught up to where we were at in our life. And to continue being honest, I felt I had to just continue folding in what was going on in our life. And so I just folded it in and made it a part of the story. And it was also I guess that's the other thing, is that, like I said, the dog was revealing a lot to me about what was going on in my own mind. And that didn't stop once we started making the movie. I noticed that the very pure relationship that I was having to this dog, these feelings of love that had so inspired me to make the movie, became so corrupted by the process of making a movie about it. And all of a sudden, I was plundering my relationship to the dog for the film. And I felt that I had to be honest about that and represent that on screen. And it was also just where we were at in the life that I was portraying at that point. In that particular scene that you're describing near the end of the movie, by the time that we were shooting that, Grace would never be quite so harsh to me, but on some level, it was hard to tell where the movie was and where the fiction was at that point. And I had gotten myself so deep into this mess at that point, I felt I just had to go all in and continue folding in the reality of how I had corrupted this relationship to something that had started very pure.
I think that, when I was adapting this play, so it's like a play where it was just me performing on a stage with some sound cues. There was no visual aids when I performed the play. And so as I thought about the movie, it felt like, well, in a play you can talk about things and that's okay. The words are the aesthetic. But in order for that to translate, I realized I need to show the audience the movie I'm talking about. And so that was kind of the beginning of it. And really for me, the movie was there was this song. So if you see the movie, I guess we're on July 4th at 8 p.m. But if you see it, like there's a song, a very famous song from 1969 that's played throughout the film. You hear it multiple times. That was the kind of in point for me. But then also there's this very famous actress, and she's just beautiful, and the way she does her hair and her eyes and her makeup, and she's just flawless. And I really needed to show her in order for us to understand kind of the bar of like what being a woman is, what being perfection is, and what the sort of, what I am trying to achieve, because to me, that actress is also a symbol of like the perfection of the mother. The mother is her, it's like the Elizabeth Taylor, like that woman the Audrey Hepburn, like who is she in your lives? Who is that figure that you're always trying or think you have to be like? Who is that for you? For me, it was the actress, i.e. my mother. And so I was like, okay, I have to show that. And so then I was like, I have to show these scenes from the movie, so we all have to be on the same page. I think I really went down a rabbit hole by writing in the scene. So you see the actresses in the movie at some point all play this actress in the movie at some point. They all wear the same outfit, the sari. She wears a sari. They all have their hair done. And you see the actresses do this at different ages. So 3 different actresses play the role of this actually famous actress from a movie. And it's because that's what I always wanted, and so in some ways it was me living out my fantasy. And if you go back to the short film, in the short film, I do that. So the spark of the feature really is me in this short film. I am like, what would it be like if I could be the perfect woman? But like, what if the perfect woman falls in love with not the perfect man, but a perfect woman in drag? Right? So it's like reimagining Bollywood, reimagining the scenes of your childhood, but manifested in the way that you are, the way you see love, the way you see your dreams, the way that makes sense to you. And so that felt really important. And there were definitely moments where I was like, is this going to make sense to anybody else? But that's a way of just sort of, I think it is that, Bollywood to me is very inherently queer and inherently very drag. And so I wanted to depict that dragness, that queerness in the film.
Yeah, what I think really fascinating about it from a cinematic point of view is that you sort of introduce us to it, because there's the scene where the main character is watching the film with her girlfriend and explaining it a bit to her. It's like how this works. And there's a thing, and it's a concept that's used in the film, and I'm not as well versed in the depths of Bollywood, but it is common that in the tradition of Bollywood, they'll have characters who play multiple roles. In this film, it happens that there's a key character who plays multiple roles. And so you take that over, and your main character plays herself in modern day and plays her mother in the 1960s sections of the film. And I think it's in the opening scene where she's explaining the film, how Bollywood works. She says, we're not subtle in Bollywood. We're not subtle. We tell you exactly. And I think that works very well with your film, because I don't think your film is necessarily subtle. It's very emotionally direct. And by doing this sort of, metaphysical caging of it, you say, like, I know I'm not being subtle, and I don't want to be. I want to be directly emotional, and I can do that in a way that people aren't going to say, oh, come on, this doesn't seem, emotionally logical or whatever. It doesn't seem, realistic and blah, blah. Because no, of course not. We're doing cinema, and through this lens that you project, I think it works very, very effectively. Can I ask, sort of talked a little bit about Canadian cinema in general, but I don't even know how to do that. Before we talk a little bit more broadly, because I would like to ask your opinions on what you think, where you think Canadian cinema is right now. In both these films, they seem like incredibly difficult things to pull off in some ways. budget level, ambition, and so forth. What was the sort of single most challenging aspect of getting these films done? I mean, you did a film in 2 countries and so forth, not as a co-production, which is probably another challenge. You did the thing that everyone says never to do, which is make a film with an animal, with a dog. I mean, were those the most challenging things? What was the most challenging aspect of like getting this film over the line, getting it actually made?
So yes, our film, we shot it in Nova Scotia, Canada, and also in Karachi, Pakistan. And I'd say, it's funny as you were talking about like the film, 1 location, 2 actors, a dog, 1 place. I was like, right. I chose to make 2 countries, neither city I live in, and 2 crews. Like everything was
3 time zones, 3 different times,
3 time
right?
periods, like changing costumes every day. 2 of my producers are in the room. I'm sure they have lists and lists of all the challenges, which we couldn't have crossed or jumped over any of those hurdles without both of them in all the ways. One of the things that is not very sexy to talk about, but I do think was a very big challenge, is it was very hard to get our film insured. Does anybody love to talk about insurance? Yeah, okay. Right, so you know what I'm talking about. But it was really challenging because, and I do find this to be a systemic problem, and I think the more we talk about it, the more we can challenge the system on this. But nobody wanted to insure the Pakistani portion of the film because they said, well, that's there was just a flood in Pakistan. And I was like, okay, well, there are fires in LA every day of the year, but everybody's filming in LA, And truly it was such a problem because it was, I would say, I have no problem saying it's deeply racist, it's deeply systemic, it's targeted towards certain people of certain countries and certain stories. And so finally we did get it, thanks to the hard work of my producers, and it was much more expensive. We had to pay it. We had no choice. You can't make a movie unless it's insured. And the irony of it is, of course, there were challenges. Every movie is a miracle. There's always problems and challenges every day. But the thing that happened to us was in Nova Scotia, there was a hurricane. In Nova Scotia, there was a hurricane that impacted our filming because we did go to Sydney, Nova Scotia, the smaller town, and we shot there for a few days. We were hoping to get the beautiful fall colors, and we wanted to shoot in certain areas. We had to change the plan a little bit because the hurricane really impacted the people, and everyone was okay, but that was a huge problem. And so I really think it's important to talk about that because we are very fortunate in Canada to have the beautiful government funding and opportunities that we do, and yet there are still barriers for people who want to shoot in places like my country where my family is from, in Pakistan, and I know I'm not alone. And as a Muslim, woman, I know that it's not just this one place. I know there are so many untold stories of the challenges and barriers that we face. And so that's something that I think is not talked about enough. And it's because it's not sexy, but so important.
Yeah. Who says insurance isn't sexy? What for you was the biggest challenge of, not emotional challenge, but just the physical thing of getting this over the line?
Yeah, the dog was actually pretty good to work with, but very difficult to find a dog to work with because I knew we couldn't work with our actual traumatized rescue dog because she was way too fragile to put through the machinery of a filmmaking process. So then to try and find an actor dog that could portray that quivering vulnerability felt like a tall order because most
You might be laughing, but this is absolutely true. The dog is amazing in this movie. Yeah. And she's a true professional. But.
Yeah. No, the dog steals the show. The dog steals the show. And,
Could this be a series?
Please, God, no.
It's just called Rescue Dog?
Please, for the love of God, let the movie be over.
I think Canada would greenlight this. Yeah. And everyone loves dogs. They're non-controversial.
Yeah. And yeah, you know, most dogs that you audition, they're auditioning for like the Air Bud type role. They're being the perfect dog. They go from point A to point B and look at the camera and maybe show their tongue, and then there's supposed to be, you know, a little piece of Iam's dog food that goes into their mouth for the glory shot of the commercial. And we were looking for the opposite of that, and I was really emphatic to my producer that if we don't find a dog that can really portray this vulnerability, we're not making the movie. Because to bastardize the vulnerability that I was seeing in my dog would have just been a nightmare. It would have really been just, the movie would have made no sense. And so luckily, my producer found a woman who works in the like agility contest dog circuit, like the competitions where dogs run through hoops and jump over hurdles and whatnot. She doesn't work in film and television normally. And the dog, she had a whole roster of dogs that competed in these competitions, and one of them was a whippet. And whippets have this kind of natural, emaciated look. They look like they're starving, like they're very bony and spindly, and she looked kind of alien. And because of that, when she would get excited in any way, you can see her ribs like quiver with anticipation, and her tail kind of naturally curls between her legs. So once we found her, we were pretty much set, but the hunt was exhaustive and took a long time.
I have to say what I found out, because your actual rescue dog is a Chihuahua, right?
Yes.
I also thought I had this miss as well. I mean, identity-wise, I'm not sure if that's on having a whippet play a Chihuahua. I'm not sure if the Chihuahua community will be on for that. Yeah. But you know. But it is quite impressive. I'm getting quite obsessed now with dog performances. I've did a whole thing on the dog in Anatomy of a Fall. Nice. and so forth. But can I ask, if you say, want to talk a little bit, you mentioned sort of the different challenges of like on the insurance side and so forth. And it's interesting that you say that certain stories are a bit more difficult to tell because Canada tries to pride itself in being very diverse and being very supportive of much more diverse storytelling. There's a lot of programs that are set up for that. And if I look at, I don't know, a lot of what's coming out of Canada, I'm quite impressed by the variety, I should say. I mean, I've seen your guys' films, thinking of a film like Blackberry, which you're in from last year, which I think is a phenomenal way of telling that story in a very interesting and very Canadian way. Saw Rumors the other night, Guy Madden, who is a very distinct voice in Canadian cinema. Where do you think the challenges are? I mean, you mentioned some of the aspects. Is it these sort of more technical things of like saying certain stories aren't considered insurable, aren't considered, backable, or is it a broader thing that, the people with power and to sign checks in Canada are still thinking, well, we want a certain type of story, and if you don't fit in that, you're going to fall through the cracks? I mean, where do you see as the biggest challenges at the moment in our industry? I
mean, I really can only speak from my experience and perspective, and I know everyone has sort of entered the flow of these funding systems and structures at different times, and all have really valid experiences. But what I have seen is, we were very fortunate, and I think we had great timing. We were funded by, do we have Canadians in the room? Right, okay, so y'all know. So some of you know, we were funded by Telefilm Canada, we were funded by CMF, the Canadian Media Fund. We sort of got these early windows from television with CBC and Crave and put those into the film. And then we had to kind of finish. We did have a lot of music and VFX and a very expensive movie that we had to license and song. Which Jason, my producer, had to deal with for a year and a half. And so we had to get a private investor to finish the film. But I would say that what I see and what I experience is that, and this is broadly outside of Canada as well, but like oftentimes when you are telling Muslim stories, people want to see the trauma enacted upon you and against you. People want to glorify and exotify the violence that you have suffered in order to be here in this place of thrival. They want to feel better about themselves for funding you who are in so much pain. And those are not the stories I tell. I center joy, hope, survival, comedy, love, aspirational stories, because the stories that we need to center right now, as we're seeing with the genocide happening in Gaza, we need to see stories of hope and joy, love, possibility. That's what we need. And that's what I really center. And so what I see is that sometimes people are like, well, I don't know if that's as filmic or cinematic of a film because it's hopeful and joyful, and I don't see your wound.
Yeah, can I ask about this? Because I think it's really fascinating. There's I've been living here in Germany for many, many years. One of my favorite German films the last 20 years is Almanya, which is a film made by two first-generation Turkish-German women, and it tells basically their story of being, their family coming over here, whatever. Really, really funny. It's a full-on comedy. Very smart in the way it does languages, because it switches into German and it has the German speak in an incomprehensible version, so it experiences like what you experience as a foreigner coming to this country, and so forth. Incredibly successful commercially as well. Very, very successful. Won awards. Very commercially successful. It took them forever to get that film made for the same reason. That funding bodies saying, like, I don't really think that's the story of Turkish Germans here and whatever. And that film, I said, did very, very well. Since then, there haven't been those films anymore. They still, the system hasn't learned. And I wonder if that's something to do with the way film bodies work, that they see themselves as being, culturally representative and so forth, and they want to help, disadvantaged communities, but then they see the disadvantaged communities as being victims, and so they have to show them as victims and not as,
And I think that's really true. It's like we're all sort of creatures of sort of habit. If we see that this is what's getting funded, we want to get our work funded, right? And so it's like, well, how do I adapt and make my work fit the thing that was funded in the last few years? Or what are they looking for right now? So I think that is the nature of these systems. And I think also being someone who does comedy and very bright storytelling, and I want commercial success in the respect that I want people to watch the film. Like, I want as many eyeballs on my work, and I don't make in a vacuum. Like, I make it so that you have an experience of it. I don't make it just for me, right? Like, that's not where I'm at anymore. Maybe I was, but I'm like, I want us to be able to have an experience together that is about us. And I think because I believe in comedy, there's comedy in everything. Every moment of grief we have, there's also laughter. Every moment of comedy we have, there's also grief. And so I do think this sort of joyous place is something that's seen as not as important. And there's no Oscar for comedy. Right? It's not just in Canada or in these spaces of, government funding, countries that get the government arts funding. It's that these sort of ways of telling stories are not valued or deemed as important. And I think there's something about that needs to change, because a documentary is so valuable and so important. But also, are we making sometimes only in a vacuum? Like, are the people who really need to see the work seeing it? And we need to see the stories of people just living and laughing and not just surviving, but thriving. And to see those communities just being so big and expansive, for us to place value on them as people. And so I think there is something deep and systemic that does need to change. And maybe if the Oscars get a Oscar for comedy, that the other bodies will start to value it, because we see that, right? When you make it I live in Los Angeles now, so when you make it in LA, I've heard Canada looks at you differently.
It seems to be.
It seems to be, right.
Yeah. Except for that Edmund Euler guy who went to LA after he left his hockey career in Canada, but we won't mention him.
We won't mention him.
So, I mean, again, this is a generic question, but how are you view like what's happening in the Canadian industry at the moment? Where do you see the biggest challenges? Because I think both the films that you guys made, but I mentioned Blackberry as a great example because it's a film that seems to have been also made not under the radar, but have slipped itself in. It was made with a lot of funding, made as a big movie, but it's quite subversive look at at the corporate world, and is also very funny, and it slips out all in that. So it seems those films can get made. But I mean, where do you see the sort of the main challenges within the Canadian context?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Blackberry is an interesting example. I just had a small role in it, but that offered me the opportunity to be on set and watch it being made and use it as an opportunity to observe how they were making it. And I know that for them, that crew has a very strong spirit of charging through red tape as proudly as possible. It's really their MO and their philosophy. And I think that has a lot to do with why they were able to make the movie and maintain their spirit despite it being such a big budget film. And so I think, yeah, they were, and now it's interesting because I have a small role in his next movie, and they are regressing intentionally, completely into a absolute micro budget. There's like 3 people on the set because they feel as though in order to really make independent, original work in a Canadian context, it's an asset to keep it as close to home as possible and not get too caught up in the bigger machinery that can come along with bigger budgets and bigger opportunities. And in both of their projects, I think that has a lot to do with it. They kept it to their closest collaborators and people who really understood the spirit of their work. In terms of the Canadian industry as a whole, when I was thinking about that question in advance of this panel, it's telling that while I was a producer on my film, that I at core I'm more of a filmmaker because not that producers aren't filmmakers, producers are filmmakers as well, but more of a director because I interpreted the question as what's the landscape of directors like in Canada at first. And in that respect, it's so hopeful. The number of voices of filmmakers in Canada who I feel have 10 fantastic films ahead of them in their career is incredibly rich. On the other side of things, the distribution and marketing and actually getting people to see the movies, first of all, that they exist, and then once they know that they exist, to go to them not as a chore, but as an enthusiastic act of recreation and intake, I think is a lot more challenging. I think, yeah.
Yeah, what's the status on both of your films? I mean, yours was in Rotterdam, right, this year, and yours premiered in Toronto last year and has come out in Canada, is that right?
Yeah, we did a theatrical in Canada, and it's going to be online on Crave in July. Is it July now?
It is July.
It's not yet. Not yet.
And in terms of other distribution, is it going to go, are your films going to go internationally? Do you know that? Do you have those things set up, or is that still sort of in the works?
For us, we sold it in the UK as well. We were at TIFF, and then after TIFF, we announced that we were selling in Canada alongside. We're self-distributing, actually. We self-distributed in Canada, which is not common, but given the very dismal landscape of distribution in Canada, we chose to do this, and we were supported by Telefilm in that respect. It is not easy, but we did it with Cineplex Pictures as our partner on that. And then we had our international premiere at BFI London Film Festival in October, and then sold to Pekka Pix thereafter, and have not released yet theatrically in the UK, but that should be sometime in September. And in the US, we had our US premiere at South by Southwest in March, and so are still touring festivals in the US and are still in conversations. It's also quite a dismal landscape for distribution in the US. And quite frank, I mean, I think you bring up such a great issue. Like, you can get a movie made, but how do you get people to watch it? And if you listen to the gatekeepers, they won't watch it unless you have a star. And that really goes against the grain of any of us making independent films where we, you know, get an unknown dog. Like, maybe the dog is known, I don't know. You know what I mean?
He will be. He will. Or she will be.
After this, like, watch out. Like, he'll be the next dog at Cannes on the carpet doing interviews. But, you know, unless you have a studio movie, just, you know, with a sales agent set up at WME and, a star, you can't, who's going to watch your film? So you really have to have hope and be in it for the long haul. And, you know, you end up kind of taking on some of that, even if you don't want to as a director. It's like, okay, well, I have to push this film out because otherwise, how are people going to know about it?
That does seem to be the real choke point at the moment in this whole industry is distribution. You know, how can you actually know the people? How can you get people to know that your film actually exists, and how to get them to actually find a place to watch it and to be able to see it?
100%. I mean, that is talking. You know, just coming back to the systemic problem. I mean, part of the systemic issue is that the gatekeepers, the distributors, tell you that I don't know who's going to buy that, or we don't have the market for that, or that'll be too. They don't want to do the labor. They haven't invested time or money into those audiences. They look at a film that is full of brown people and they sort of pigeonhole it as a film that's only for those audiences, and they just want to be like, okay, this movie is for these kinds of people, this movie is for these kinds of people. And if they don't have already a film that is for these kinds of people, they won't take on that film. So it basically means unless you already fit into these majority categories or niche categories that they have experience with, they won't take your movie. That doesn't mean your movie isn't awesome. That doesn't mean your movie doesn't have audiences. It just means that the system is broken. And so that's a part of the thing that, like, we need more distributors, quite frankly, because the buyers will buy them. Netflix will buy your movie if a good distributor shows Netflix that there's an audience. So, you know, I think that there is a sort of an innovation point right here, you know, that's happening or hopefully about to happen. And it doesn't have to be in the self-distribution model, but in new distributors, hopefully run by women and people of color and people who see the value of the rest of these filmmakers and films and audiences.
Yeah, there's kind of a lack of a distributor in Canada with a big reach that has, I guess, a reputation of putting out work that people can depend on, such that when that distributor comes out with a movie, people are interested to go and see it because that distributor has a brand of its own. Like, you think about the extreme example being A24 or something like that, or even Neon. When they put out a film, even, I mean, those distributors do tend to put out films that just have celebrities in them for the most part, but they've become their own celebrity to an extent. And in Canada, it's the marketing of the films, but also the marketing of the distributors themselves and their brand themselves. I think there's an ambiguity, I feel, to the distribution landscape, that people don't know what it necessarily means when a distributor is putting out a Canadian film without celebrity.
And I guess some of that connects to, and we learned this, I would say maybe the hard way on The Queen of My Dreams, is, and we know this, right? People are going to the movie theater less. It's harder to get a person to buy a ticket, go see a movie in the movie theater. They would rather watch it at home, or maybe they won't watch it, or maybe they'll watch it at a film festival. But even film festivals are often, you know, not the at-home, you know, it's still a niche group of people going to film festivals. But in Canada, I learned that the distributors don't make money at the theater. So they don't really invest a lot of money into that, or they make money on the sale of the film for TV. And that's really it. And so if you're in a situation like our film where you already sold the TV rights, there's very little that a distributor feels like a benefit for them to come on board to try to distribute your movie, because they're like, this is just going to be a loss. Mm-hmm. And so that feels deeply problematic and a sign of, a problem in the landscape that's in Canada, but probably internationally, and especially in the US as well.
I really commend you guys for doing the self-distribution, because I feel like you're right to say the system is broken, but then there's some degree of responsibility on us as filmmakers to continue to rely on it and invest in it and hope that these distributors are going to get our film a widespread audience in Canada. So I commend y'all for, carving your own path and trying to engage with the audiences that you know are there.
Well, I think that's why film festivals matter so much. Yeah. It's like an opportunity for us to engage with actual people.
Right. Yeah, no, I think you're both right, and it's actually a great place to stop. I think you're absolutely right that sort of distribution is the piece that has to be reconfigured, and maybe it's self-distribution, maybe it's people in this room could set up their own distribution companies and find a new way to actually get great films out there that have audiences but aren't being served at the moment. But I have to ask both of you, because I really both your first films, and I thought really, compelling. Both you go out and see them here at the festival, rent it later, buy it, tell your friends to go out and see them. But I have to know what you guys are planning to do next. Do you know what your next projects are going to be? Do you have an idea? These are both very, very personal, very deep movies. Is that what you're looking to do next, or do you have an idea what your next project, next story is going to be?
Yeah, I'm working on a script right now about a married couple of two couples therapists who try to talk through a small domestic quibble that spirals out of control into a horror show of suppressed primordial terror.
Comedy, I assume.
Comedy.
Yeah.
Dark comedy. Funnily enough, I have a feature. The next feature that I wrote is a feature called Heirloom, and it's about...
That's taken.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you're the heirloom.
That's right.
Mine is heirloom. And it's about some queer besties who steal the heirloom jewelry that was promised to one of them that their mother would no longer give them. So it's sort of a heist comedy. And that's, my wife, Andrea Wilson Mirza, is going to be producing that. And then I'm also attached to direct a couple other projects and shifting into also directing television.
Well, you guys, then when you get Heirloom done, you can do it as a double bill. That'd be,
Hey.
Oh my God, I know. I know. We'll be giving heirloom jewelry away and also dogs.
And also dogs, or
So
jewelry,
you'll get rescue dogs.
or jewelry for dogs, which is a whole other
my God.
market.
Or
This
you
is
get
the
the
kind
dog-
of creative thinking we need.
Yeah, exactly. We'll talk later.
Oh my God,
We'll
I
talk later.
think we have a company right
Yeah,
here.
there you go. Just need a brand. Well, thank you so much for coming. Please enjoy the rest of your festival. And I say, check out both the movies, The Heirloom and The Queen of My Dreams. Thanks so much.
Thank
you.
Thanks.